So I remember the first time I ever heard Greg Mott preach. I was 18 years old. That was 30 years ago, all right? And I was a freshman at Texas A&M, and I was in the midst of a full-blown spiritual and existential crisis. I just didn't know what to believe. And in the midst of that, I was turned down for living in the dorm. I was living off campus, and I was with some older guys that they weren't monsters, but they weren't Christians, and just living a very secular life. And so for me, as I was struggling with faith, is this true or not, I was very isolated and in a troubled day. And I remember in the midst of that, I was riding the bus home one day, and as I was on the bus on campus, it was kind of slowly turning around this corner, I saw near the Rudder Fountain this massive group of students. And I saw this big crowd as we slowly rolled by, and then all of a sudden, from over their heads, I saw a cross being erected with a man crucified on it. And I thought at the time, A&M was kind of a dark place. I don't know if you know this, but back then, A&M was not really known as a place of Bible studies. If I did a word association, what do you think of when you think of A&M? You would probably think Corps cadets, but mostly it was football and heavy drinking, right? Far more known for binge drinking than Bible studies. And here I was in the middle of the state campus driving by this scene, and I'm like, and now they're crucifying people? My good heavens, where am I? But I showed up the next day to see what is going on here, and there was an even larger crowd in that same area, and it turns out it was Res Week. A bunch of Christian organizations that I didn't know existed were doing this thing together. And so this big crowd had marshaled in the center of campus, and as we were all there, I remember a guy who didn't look much older than us stood up in the midst of this crowd and began to preach. And I remember he was winsome, he was funny, he was totally dialed in on the college experience. Like he had us all dead to rights. And his craft had just been honed to a point. He knew how to speak to us. And though it was engaging and fun, it was also very pointed and bold. You are beautiful in the image of God, but you are broken because of sin, and you can't fix you. And that's why Jesus had to die for you, was buried in a grave and rose again, that you might have life if you repent and believe the gospel. And I watched this man in the midst of what I thought was just a place of such darkness and sadness proclaim boldly the necessity of Jesus Christ. And I got to tell you, as an 18-year-old who was confused and isolated, it was like a ray of sunshine piercing through the clouds. It was light in the dark. And in one of my most difficult times in life, it gave me hope. How did I get it? Because he was bold. I had a friend say later that Greg Mott is a little man with a big sword. His words, not mine, but it makes sense. How could Paul be so bold? Why? Verses 3 and 4 give it to us. For our appeal does not spring from error or impurity or any attempt to deceive. But just as we've been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak. Not to please men, but to please God, who tests our hearts. He says the reason they were bold is because they didn't have flimsy motives. We weren't misled. This wasn't an intellectual mistake. We didn't have impure, bankrupt motivations. And this wasn't an attempt to deceive you. Number two, what's the attribute of a godly minister? Then sincere. They mean it. We weren't deluded, and we weren't trying to trick you. We didn't do this for the likes, we didn't do it for the gram, we didn't do it for the followers, and we certainly didn't do it for the money. What? We were bold even in beatings. Why? Because we believed it. And so we didn't need some other motivation. I had a young man ask me that once. Hey man, when you're preaching up there, you just look like you really mean it. What's the secret? And I said, do you want to know the secret? I said, yeah. I said, you really mean it? You really believe what you're talking about, because that belief will make you bold.
Hey, thanks for watching. To find out more about Houston's First, you can subscribe to our channel, or you can go to houstonsfirst.org.